talking about crime in Web3, which is fantastic to see so many of you here. 3 p.m. on the last day of the conference. I kind of thought it might be a bit empty, but apparently this room is either full of criminals who want some tips or people that are hopefully going to be protected against crime. Now, my name is Annison. I've spent the last 4 years working at Elliptic, which is a crypto compliance company. I'm now actually in the world of staking. So if you want to talk to me about both crime and staking as a service, then hit me up. But today, I'm going to focus on crime, so looking at some of the key trends in Web3, looking then at scams specifically, because that affects a lot of us, projects, users, and then going to dive into the really kind of dark side of things, so sanctions evasion and terrorist fundraising. And then I'm going to look ahead into metaverse crime, which is an area that not many people are thinking of, but there's actually already crime happening, and there's some pretty wild future crimes that might happen. So from a key trend perspective, the first key trend I want to bring out, and the formatting's gone a bit crazy, but is that Bitcoin is no longer actually the asset of choice for criminals. So back in 2016, Bitcoin made up around about 97% of illicit volume. Last year, it was just 19%, so really big reduction. And that's criminals moving to non-Bitcoin-based assets. Primarily, it's Ethereum-based assets and on Binance Smart Chain. So last year, there was about $3.7 billion stolen from hacks and exploits. So that's not scams, it's just people getting into the protocol, finding their way through a smart contract. And 68% of that was, perhaps unsurprisingly, Ethereum-based assets. Now, we do still see Bitcoin being used. It's primarily on the dark markets. Now, if you want to go buy guns, drugs, and anything else on the dark market, you're going to use Bitcoin, although we do see Monero used. The problem is with Monero, it's really hard to get hold of because most of the centralized exchanges now don't support it. So if you are making your funds in Monero and you want to get to fiat, it can be quite hard to off-ramp it. So that's why we still do see Bitcoin, because it's the most accessible for dark markets. Now, another kind of brand of coin that we see more and more is stablecoins being used for criminals. Now, this is because they're really easy to basically dupe noobs with. Like, if you're new to the industry, something which is dollar-denominated feels a little bit more accessible, and so the criminals use that as a target point. It's also super easy to launder through DEXs. There's deep liquidity, really good volume. And what we're seeing now is more USDC and more USDT addresses be blacklisted. So if you're not familiar with this, it's a function within the smart contracts that essentially allows Circle and Tether to freeze your funds. Now, from a decentralization perspective and from a censorship perspective, that's pretty worrying. But from a crime perspective and fighting crime, it's actually pretty good, because if a criminal exploits something and they're now holding a load of USDC, if Circle acts quick enough, they can freeze the funds, and then the criminals can't basically off-ramp out of that asset. So what we're seeing now is an increased number of accounts with USDT and USDC being blacklisted, and these are frozen funds that the criminals now can't access. Another key trend is Ponzi schemes and pyramids. It might feel a bit 80s, but they reign supreme. And we saw in 2022, $7.8 billion worth of funds were stolen from users in the space from Ponzi's and pyramids. Now, the 10 largest of these schemes accounted for about 54%. So the Ponzi's and pyramids tend to get really big and dominate. There's some huge players there. And 2 examples are Forsage and Tradecoin Club. So Forsage is a very well-known Ponzi scheme. They raised nearly $350 million for the 2-ish years until they were prosecuted, which was last year. Now, they were Ethereum, BSC-based. Again, you'll see common themes here with assets. Tradecoin Club was really damaging. There was over 100,000 users which were victims of this, and it ran for about 2 years for nearly $300 million. So these investment schemes, these Ponzi schemes, are really impactful for everyday users. Now, another trend that we're seeing is criminals getting a little bit more sophisticated to launder funds. So they're using chain swapping, asset swapping to try and hide their illicit activity. And we've seen that to the tune of about $4.1 billion. So they hop across using a DEX, they use a coin swap service, they use a mixer, they use a bridge, all basically to try and throw blockchain analytics firms off the trail. Now, we see this most with thefts. So if you have a thief, they've got a load of assets, they'll try and move out of the initial assets that they got them in, especially if it's USDC and USDT. They'll swap it for another asset that has good liquidity, maybe it's got some good exposure on exchanges. They might then move it over to another chain, all with the aim of when they go into a SEX, for that SEX who's using a blockchain analytics firm, not to see the trail right back to the theft. And we've seen about $1.2 billion stolen from DEXs eventually end up on a SEX, but they've gone through this coin swapping and this chain hopping. Now, from a scam perspective, I actually have some good news. So scams are down around about 46%, which is great, but the reason why is because the price is down. So what we tend to see is a correlation between the price and scams. And that's because we've got less new people coming into the industry, they're less hyped up, the prices are lower, so it's not as profitable for criminals. So at least next time we're in a bear market, do bear in mind that the scams are at least down. Now, of the 10 highest scams last year, all of them were investment scams. This is a very classic scam where someone basically says, give me your Bitcoin or your Ether, I'll invest it, you'll make 1 billion% return. They never do. In fact, actually, a load of them are really evil. Once you put the funds in, they've got quite good dashboards with nice UI that will show you you're making profits. It's not even paper profits, totally make-believe profits. When you then go to withdraw them, they'll say, oh, there's just a fee to withdraw, or your bank is being a bit difficult, you just need to give us some extra money. And so you see people scam twice. Initially, when they put the funds in, and then when they try and take them out. So it can be really damaging. But there's a couple of other scam types which you might be less familiar with. The first is drainers. So these are super impactful across the space, and we've had a bit of a spate of them recently. So monkey drainer and venom drainer are the two most popular ones, but there's also pussy and pink drainer. Collectively this year, they've seen about $64 million stolen from people. And what a drainer is essentially a bit of software. It's often got to the user through a phishing scam or some kind of malicious link. You click on it, up pops your MetaMask, and it just asks you to sign a little transaction. That transaction will wipe all of your fungible assets, all of your non-fungible assets. So really, really damaging. It's done in an interesting way, actually. So criminals will basically outsource this and take a cut of the profits. So Monkey Drainer, who disappeared in February, kind of closed up shop, he was making a 30% commission on every crime that happened afterwards. So a bit of a franchise situation. Venom Drainer had around about 15,000 victims, and feel sorry for the top victim because they lost $4.3 million worth of assets. A single person, really impactful. But there's then an actually good scam happening at the moment. So CSAM stands for Child Sexual Abuse Material. And I bet you don't think what I'm going to say is good here, but there is a scam that's happening a lot now where scammers will pretend to have child sexual abuse material, someone will pay them for it, but they don't have any material at all. Now, if you're that person, you can't go to the police. Oh, someone stole my money because I was trying to buy child porn. That's like really not going to fly. So this is actually a really good scam that's happening in the space. And for the $3 million worth of action that we've seen with CSAMers, over 66% of it is scams. So that's 66% of purchases that aren't actually for child porn. It's someone getting scammed, which is nice. On the less nice side is romance scams. So these are some of the most damaging ones per user. You see about £15.5 thousand stolen from each user, and they're really horrible. The idea is you make someone fall in love with you, you suggest they invest in crypto or that they give you your crypto assets, and then they steal them. So it's a breakup and it's a theft in one. It's really, really damaging. But what you perhaps don't know about romance scams is one of the biggest ways that they're proliferated is in scam centers like this, often operating in Southeast Asia, where the people working in there have been lured under false pretense of job offers or actually human trafficked there. There are people working in these scam centers being forced to scam. They do not want to scam you, but if they don't, there's fears of violence. Often their family is being held captive, or the criminals know where their family is and put threats against them. And there's even really horrible things like Telegram groups where low performers in these scam factories are sold between different factories and where people who run away have bounties on them. So next time you're scammed, just like bear a little bit of thought that the person who scammed you genuinely might not want to scam you at all. They're fearing for their life. And this is really sad, but it's growing. We're seeing scam factories and centers across loads of areas in Southeast Asia and also in Africa. Now, when we look at sanctions evasion and terrorist financing, 2022 was a big year for sanctions. So we had Tornado Cash, I'm sure everyone remembers that. There was also Garantex, Hydra Market, all sanctioned by the US. There was even a Russian metaverse platform, which was sanctioned. But if we take Hydra, for instance, that was a dark market, Russian language. $5 billion was flowing through it in crypto funds, mainly for drug-related activity. There was classic, a little bit of hitmen here as well. They had about $8 million linked to ransomware. So really impactful crime was going through Hydra. That was shut down, which is definitely a positive. But staying on the kind of Russian topic, we've also seen a lot of fundraising from pro-Russian criminals and pro-Russian organizations around the war. There's one particular group who are suggesting to people within Russia and Ukraine that if they find a dead Ukrainian soldier, they bury them and then contact the family for a ransom in Bitcoin. So there's some really nasty things happening from a sanctions perspective and certainly connected to the war. A piece of good news, though, is that Ukrainian fundraising versus Russian fundraising is actually outnumbered about 44-1. So there's a lot more crypto going for Ukraine than Russia. Now, some other items in the sanctions and terrorist fundraising, and my slides seem to have gone a little bit hayward, but the asset of choice for terrorists is actually Tron and USDT. Yeah, there's a lot of really quite dodgy activity happening on the Tron blockchain that we're seeing. There was a 240% year-on-year increase. So the terrorists are looking at Tron, which is a bit worrying. When we look at Tornado Cash, pre-sanctions, $1.5 billion, and that's a lower bound, went through for the North Korean hacking group. So funds specifically going to North Korea there. And from the mining perspective, perhaps a surprise here, but there are countries, whole countries, who are using mining as a way to evade sanctions. So in 2021, it was estimated that around about 4.5% of all Bitcoin mining was happening in Iran, and they were using that to evade sanctions. But now looking kind of a little bit further ahead in the final minutes, just looking at metaverse crime. Now, there's a whole bunch of crimes that can happen in the metaverse, and essentially any crime that can happen in the real world will probably happen to some form or other in the metaverse, and there's even going to be crimes that only happen in the metaverse because of the technology that underpins it. Now, we've seen a whole bunch of crimes happening already. There was a 900,000K ape coin crime that happened. There's a phishing crime. The Azuki team had their Twitter hacked, their gold tick Twitter hacked not too long ago. The scammers pretended to launch a new metaverse, which was being teased for a while. And there was about 750,000 worth of assets that were taken, a whole bunch of NFTs. Now, their fungibles were liquidated, a whole bunch ended up at Tornado Cash, which actually makes this both a theft and a sanctions violation. And perhaps unsurprisingly, the NFTs were all laundered. The criminal actually only made about 5K off them, but they did have a doodle and massively undersold it, so that was a bit sad. But then looking ahead to the future of metaverse crime, there's some really quite dodgy stuff. One is wallet tainting. This is really kind of like building on the dusting that we saw from Tornado Cash being sanctioned. But imagine if you have quite a big persona in the space and someone sends you an NFT which is racist, homophobic, just something really illicit. It could seriously damage your reputation. So as more of us have more online personas, I think we're going to start seeing more people sending you funds from illicit sources or sending you NFTs which could damage your reputation. There's also augmented reality hacks. So next time you're scanning a QR code, just bear in mind that someone could be putting malicious code in there. I think we're going to start seeing that more and more as we get used to scanning things around us from an augmented reality perspective. There's even, and this sounds probably the most crazy, hardware attacks. So this VR headset was more of a thought experiment than a commercial product, but someone put TNT explosives in it, so if you died in-game, the headset exploded and you died. Please no one take that away as a product idea, but it does show some of the risks from a hardware perspective. And then finally, just the other two things, 3D social engineering from an avatar level, but also just using the improvements in AI and video manipulation will become more of a thing across the space. And then I think we're going to start seeing, as we kind of use virtual worlds a bit more, metaverse DDoS attacks, protests, especially if you start bringing your headquarters or your virtual workforce in there. Hopefully I haven't scared you too much, but TLDR, there's a lot of crime right now, and there's going to be a lot more. So do stay safe in the world of Web3. The criminals are really quite smart, and they are trying to catch you out. So if you're building a project, always have that in mind. And if you're interacting with dApp services, etc., just be thinking about how to protect yourself. I'll be around, so if anyone has any questions, please do catch me. Always love talking about crime in Web3. Thanks very much.